There we go. All right. We're going to be in Luke chapter 10 near the end. So get closer to chapter 11. We're talking about kindness today. Kindness. It's a good one. What do you think the definition of kindness is? Mary didn't do her homework again. I see it.
No, I wanted to say to be kind.
Oh, she's pulling out a kid answer.
Yes.
Helpful. To be kind. Kindness.
Tender-hearted.
Helpful. Love.
It's like an act, isn't it?
Yes.
It's an act of, being nice. It was interesting when I looked the word up. It actually means kindness and gentleness, which was weird because the next fruit of the Spirit's gentleness. And it's a different root word in the Hebrew that they use for it. So it was interesting that they had it that way. So in my mind, when I broke it down, I was like, okay, so to be kind, I have the kindness toward you, which is an action toward. And if the same word means gentleness, gentleness means my demeanor, my spirit in that action. So kindness is more than me just doing something nice for Mary. Kindness is the way I did that nice thing for Mary. Because I could go, and I'll just pick on you, I could go put the roof on and the whole time, I don't know why we're doing this, that's that, yeah. And I really didn't do an act of kindness. I did something that was needed, but really I didn't do it out of an act of kindness. I did an act of whatever. And then people do that all over. And especially if I do it with an attitude of someday down the road, I'm going to call this chip in, And then that's not an act of kindness either. I think it's Paul that talks about doing things where we'll never get repaid. When you do it, don't worry about ever getting. Do it for the ones that can't repay you. It's like if I do something nice for a millionaire, there may be a chance I want something back from them. But if I do it for someone that can't repay me, then what am I doing it for? It's interesting. My aunt gets more mad at me than I do. She's always fussing at me. You do more for everybody else than you do for me. And she's always fussing. And she likes to throw that, you used to call yourself a Christian at me all the time and all this stuff. And it's like, wow. And then the last time she did it, I started thinking about it. I was like, well, I don't do stuff for other people to receive something back. I said, but the chips are coming back. Because I was thinking about it, just this last time my truck has been down, everybody that's done acts of kindness for me, give me a ride, a holy handshake and other things, help me go get stuff, and I was like, so it all comes back. God always moves it in a circle, even though we don't necessarily get it all the time.
Even through sowing a seed, and receiving something as well.
It's fascinating. We're going to talk about the Good Samaritan. And I've been listening to different people, reading different things throughout the week. So last night I just happened to see another video pop up, because with YouTube, if you watch one thing, it's going to send you everything and anything on that topic, which is good in my scenario when I was studying it, but not when I'm like, I want to look at my garden shows, not this all the time, or I want to listen to my preachers, not this all the time. And so I got to go back to my subscriptions instead of just doing the home search, where if I don't watch one thing, it goes in a pretty good space where I get to watch everything I normally watch. Well, I was watching this guy, and I'm going to use some of his stuff today. He was a former professor at Dallas Seminary, and he was pretty good. He said some things that I'd never heard before. It was really, really cool what he said. So hopefully I can portray some of that to you today from the Good Samaritan. There's one thing in the Good Samaritan that is said that I'd never, ever seen that he brought up. And then when he brought it up, I was like, and it's about the neighbor. So it is pretty cool. But I want to tell you, I want to start a story of kindness before we get going. There was this there was this lady worked in a meat factory, and for whatever reason, she was curious to check out the rest of the factory. So she goes into the cooler room just to see what meat was hanging in the cooler room, I guess. She never really given an explanation of why she went in there. She was just checking out different rooms before she went off work. Well, you all know the horror stories, and you all seen it on the movies. Usually when someone goes into a locker, it locks from the outside and they can't get out. Guess what happened to this lady? She's locked in the cooler. So this was on a Friday, so they're closing down for the weekend. So she's pretty much anticipating she's stuck in this cooler all weekend. So she's in there 15 minutes. She's in there a half hour. She's in there an hour. And she's pretty much, after an hour, she's pretty much give up that anybody's going to come into the cooler. Now, next thing she knows, she hears the cooler door open. I don't know why she moved away from the door. Maybe there was a warm pocket somewhere. Who knows? And she heard the door open, and she heard someone say, "Anybody in here?" And she said, "Yeah, I came in and got locked in." And it was the security guard. Well, the security guard don't make rounds. The security guard is the gate security guard. His only responsibility is to be at the gate to check your ID to make sure you're supposed to be coming in, and to open the gate to let you leave at the end of the day. That's his only responsibility. He does not make rounds of the building. He doesn't check and see if everybody's there or not. The lady goes, "How did you know I was in here?" He said, "I didn't know I was in here. I came looking for you." And she goes, "Why did you come looking for me?" He says, "Well, you were the only person every day when you come in, you say hi to me when you come into work, and you smile at me and acknowledge me when you're walking by." And he says, "And every day when you leave, you say hi to me and you smile at me as you're leaving. You're the only one out of all the employees of this whole factory that acknowledge me as a person when you come and go. And I noticed you came in. I did not notice you leave, so I was wondering if something was wrong, and I started looking for you." Right? An act of kindness. That act of kindness, I don't know if it would have, I don't know how cold this cooler was. I don't know if she would have went, you hear the horror stories of people sitting into to get locked into certain coolers and they're not even on and they die, they freeze to death. Because their mind goes into hyper overdrive. It's so cold they're going to freeze, and they didn't even on. They would have been fine. They would have been a little wore out by the weekend if they stayed in these coolers, but it didn't freeze them to death. Their mind froze them to death. They had all the symptoms. So I don't know what this lady would have been like in this meat cooler. But a random act of kindness because she smiled at someone when she went to work every day. And because she smiled at him when he left, he says, and I don't even know if they knew each other's name, but that smile, he didn't see the smile leave, and he went looking for her.
I'm going to tell on Jane. Years ago, Virgil and Joyce Chance's grandson, all of a sudden, Greg, and Steve were in the mall. And he said it's the biggest difference how people are. Someone else that they had attended church with them didn't really acknowledge him. But here comes Jane down there. She comes down through there. "Hi, fellas." So, it does make a difference.
Yeah.
And even Steve, he used to say, well, Leroy Lager, Tom Spencer, Jim Gary, all different ones like that. They always make Bill Pepper. Always made sure they knew their name. They said their name. How do you do? It makes a big difference.
Yeah.
You feel like they know you.
Like you belong.
Yeah.
You're seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
I would probably put a high percentage of why I stayed here the first time on George.
On George.
On George.
And George,
Yeah. I would probably put a high percentage on why I stayed here is because of him.
He's quiet, but his gentle spirit.
No, because I sat in the same row as you, and once in a while he would get up, so it wasn't him getting up and coming and shaking my hand, because that's me and him, that's about as far as it went, from one end of the pew to the other. And he would come shake my hand, or I would go shake his. It wasn't that. It was whether he got up or not, he would always look down and point at me and wink at me. I know you're there. And I'd put a high percentage on why I stayed the first time. Because it was like, okay, I'm naturally introvert, so I'm not going out to seek that. So I'm just sitting here. If someone come to me, they did. If they didn't, it didn't bother me that much. But it made an impression. It was look down, point at me, and wink at me, and that was probably a high percentage of why I stayed. It's fascinating.
Yeah, Don, Bailiff, and George came to the door one day, had a truckload of wood
Yeah.
after Jim passed away.
Oh, to your house.
Yeah, over to my house.
Oh.
Yeah.
Didn't even know they were coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were burning wood at the time, and he used to cut wood for myself and Grandpa, and my mom and Papa.
Right.
And so the next thing I know, here they were at the door, George and Don Bailiff,
Yeah.
with a load of wood.
Awesome.
That was nice.
Sometime 83, 84.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We're gonna look at the Good Samaritan.
Already did. We already are.
Yeah. What would say you narrow the Good Samaritan down into one sentence? What would your sentence be?
Reaching out and caring.
Caring. Okay.
He treated him like an equal. We all should be treated like equals.
Okay.
Being respectful of others.
Respectful others. Okay.
Willing to do it if you
Willing.
see somebody in need.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, willing to help beyond cultural barriers.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
nice.
I am.
Yeah.
We're gonna look at it in those terms, but we're gonna draw some things out that probably might or may not have been said from the pulpit before. This guy, when he was like I said, he was from the Dallas Seminar, and a few things he said, I was like, never thought of that. And like I said, when it comes to who's your neighbor, when Jesus asked that question, it's interesting. So you set it up. We're setting it up, and I like to do the sandwich thing. You have, in chapter 10 of Luke, you have Jesus sending the 72 out. They come back, they're ecstatic in what they could do in the name of Jesus. Then the religious people are mad because they did these things. And a lawyer, which is nothing more fancy at that time, not the lawyer that we think of today, was just someone who studied scriptures and understood the Old Testament law. They called them lawyers. So he's getting ready to try to trap Jesus. He asks him, how do I be saved, Jesus? And Jesus, as I said, and we've said it time and time again, Jesus never usually answered the question. He usually asked you another question because he knew the right question that needed to be answered and not the question that we asked. So he said, well, what do you think? Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, that's a great answer. And Jesus tells him it's a great answer. And then the guy goes, whoa, now I can get Jesus. And in 29, verse 29, the lawyer is trying to get Jesus one more time. And this is where we're gonna start thinking a little bit about what the Good Samaritan's starting to say. Verse 29 says, but he, wishing to justify and vindicate himself, asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? How do I get saved? Jesus goes, well, I don't know. You tell me. Well, love God, love my neighbor as myself. Jesus says, that's a great answer. And the guy's puffed up. He goes, well, I really didn't catch him on that, did I? Well, then who's my neighbor, Jesus? And see, he's not asking that question because he wants to do good deeds for everyone or anyone. He wants to know if it's only for the closest one to me. Who's my neighbor? So I know I can do good for just those. Not the world, not anyone. Just my neighbor, because I want to know who my neighbor is. And society does that in different ways. My neighbor is this, they're from there, they have this, they don't have that, or they do this, or they live this way, they live that way. That's my neighbor, not just everybody. Well, I don't go on that side of the tracks, or I don't go on this side of the tracks, don't go on that side of the town, or I don't do it for those people. They're not my neighbors. And we're going to find out that Jesus is making this definition of neighbor deeper than we've ever considered before. So who is my neighbor, he says. Verse 30, where the real meat of the Good Samaritan starts to happen. Jesus replied. Again, he's not answering the question. He's going to tell a story. He's going to let you figure it out. But in the end, he's going to ask him a question and make him answer it. So again, Jesus never really answered the question. But he's going to ask him the right question the right way. The same question the guy asked, but just in a few different words. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he encountered robbers, who stripped him of his clothes and belongings and beat him and went their way, unconcerned, leaving him half dead." The geography is Jerusalem is at a higher altitude than Jericho. That's why they said down. It's about a 17-mile track, I think is what the guy said. Down a mountain, rough terrain. It was the perfect place for robbers to hide in caves and hide around the rocks and whatever else terrain is there and beat you up and do exactly like they did this guy and get his spoils. So it's interesting that it's probably the only way down the mountain, or one of the only ways down the mountain. We know it's not a safe way down the mountain because the robbers, it's their real estate. But in essence, it may be the safest of the unsafe ways down this mountain. And the only way to get from Jerusalem to Jericho was to go down the mountain. So they had no choice. Now let's set it up a little further because we're going to be talking about priests and Levites. The priests took turns serving in the temple in Jerusalem, 1 week at a time. And most of them didn't live in Jerusalem. So the priests had no choice but to go back and forth on this path at least once or twice a year. The Levites was the servant to the priest. He did what the priest needed done. Same thing. I don't know if they had the same Levite or a different Levite, or if you had your crew, So the Levite didn't live in Jerusalem. Same thing. His time to serve, he had to go back and forth. So there's the scenario. We don't know why the guy that got beat up was going back and forth. I'm going to give you a couple hints when we get to it, just something to think about. We don't have an accurate idea. We don't know why the Samaritan is going back and forth. But I'm going to give you some hints to think about, but we have no accurate idea. So there's the scenario. All of these people are going on a path, on a journey somewhere to get somewhere else. Aren't we all on a journey? Just a side note. And I'm going to give you some words with each of these guys as we're going to really make you think about each person as an individual. So 31. Now by coincidence, a priest was going down the road. Is God sovereign? So God knows everything that's going to happen, everything that has happened, everything will happen. So in essence, is there any coincidences in our life? At the moment, we may think that. But God causes people to be on the same pathway, going to and from the same place at the right time for the right purpose. So it's not a coincidence that the priest was on this because, one, we know he was working. He just got done his religious duty, a priest. Make it modern day. Our pastor just got done serving church on Sunday and is walking home. That was what you see. So you have this guy that was worshiping and serving God and presenting God to the masses in an atmosphere of awesome, the best service you ever can imagine. This is what was happening, and now he's going home. So it's not a coincidence. God knew that guy was going to be serving that week, and he knew that the robber was going to beat that guy up, and he was going to be in the ditch. It's not coincidence that they were going. But here's a preacher, our pastor, and the guy's in the ditch. Obviously, the pastor's going to feel for the guy and call the ambulance, call 911, right? Obviously, he's going to wait till someone that can really help him, because I just came for service. If I touch this dude, he's bleeding, I'm going to be unclean, and they ain't going to let me in my house when I get home, and my kids, and if he's got kids and family, can't welcome me home when I have to sleep in the doghouse. So who's this guy thinking about?
Himself.
Himself. how many times we ride up and down the roads, we go different places, and there's a need that we obviously can meet. I'm not talking about the ones that we may or may not be. I'm talking about the ones you know you can meet. And you're going through life, you cross paths with certain individuals. I'm too busy. It's going to cost me something. I'll keep on going. And that's what this priest was doing. It wasn't a coincidence. He was in a hurry to get home for whatever reason. He had a reason not to help this guy. This is in our terms, again, a pastor of the church. The lead pastor of the church. Just totally ignoring the pain and hurt that was along the side of the road that he is called to serve those people. Going down the road, when he saw him, doesn't have excuse, got home. Hey man, did you hear about that guy got beat up and had a car accident on the way home? It's the same road you live on. Oh, I didn't see nothing. Yeah, he saw him. So when he saw him, he had to make a conscious decision to do an act, right? He chose purposely to keep on walking. He saw him, and his action was he passed by on the other side. Wow. I see you over there, but I'm going to walk on that side of the road. Something bad's happening over there, but I'm going to walk on that side of the road. I have the bandages. I have my first aid kit with me. I have a phone that I can call 911. Whatever you want a scenario you want to picture in your mind of this guy being abandoned by the religious leader of the time is what happened. And this is what Jesus is telling them. The next guy comes along, the Levite. Almost the same exact scenario. Awesome worship, great services. You know, maybe he had to do a few things. He had to pick things up at the end of the service, but the preacher gets to leave right away. But he's got to lock up the church. He's got to put things away. He's got to make sure everything's okay. So he wasn't. We don't know how far behind he was. He may have been minutes. He may have been hours. We don't know. But he was right on his heels. And he's going down the road, and let's see what Jesus says about him. Likewise, a Levite also came down to the place and saw him. Same thing. The servant of God. Not the head pastor, a servant of God. Whether you want to call him associate, youth pastor, worship leader, whatever. The servant of God saw the same thing that the preacher saw. Obviously, he's going to do something different. Saw him and passed by on the other side of the road. Did the exact same thing. What thought pops into my mind? What if they wasn't so far apart? What if they were close enough that this Levite saw that pastor?
And thought he should do the same thing.
He's on his heels. Right. He sees him. Maybe in this stretch, because you're looking down the mountain, maybe you can see a mile or two down the mountain. Remember, they're going down the hill. So they've seen this guy probably laying on the side of the hill for a while, contemplating on what they should do when they get there. And maybe this Levite goes, well, the pastor went on the other side and walked by. Well, obviously that's what I'm supposed to do, because he's my mentor, he's my leader, and I'm a servant of his, so obviously that's what I'm going to do. Is it possible that that's what could have happened? I don't know. But I do know human nature. Human natures copy what we see. I do know, at least in our church, we're going to gain a servant heart because our pastor's portraying that to us. Let's go out in the community and serve. Let's love on the people we have. Let's love on the ones that come every week. Let's love on Zach and Lissa. It's their last week here. Let's love on them in their last, because he got deployed to Alaska. So let's love on them in their last week here. Let's smile in case we get locked in the church and we need the security guard to come get us out. Maybe they get locked in the church. Who knows? Let's smile at them. But the Levite saw him and passed on the other side. He's the helper of the priest. He was a servant. Well, maybe the pastor's religious enough. He shouldn't touch this measly person in the side of the road. No, not the pastor. But the servant of the pastor. The servant. He has a servant heart. He has a heart to serve the people. He obviously will help this person because he has compassion and servant. He wants to serve people. So was it because he saw the other guy go the other way? Or was it because he was religious in all things except for what God wanted? And we're going to see someone that has, in their eyes, a false religion because they built their own temple. They worship God in a different way than us, but they still worship God. And we're going to see what the Samaritan does. But a Samaritan, a foreigner who was traveling. When you travel, are you going to a destination?
Usually.
Okay, so this guy, we don't know what. I'm going to give you some things to think about, but we don't know why he was traveling, right? So let's throw a couple scenarios out, and I kind of got an idea which I'm going to stick with just as I was thinking about it. Let's say he had business to go to from Jericho. He's going to Jerusalem that same weekend for business. So he's coming home. He's on a business trip. What if he truly believed that the true living God was the God of the Jewish people and not the God or not the way that Samaritans worshipped? What if he went to the temple? He was there. He saw the priest giving this great message. And he saw the Levites serving the people with awesome, and it was like the best temple service they ever had. And he's in the front row worshiping his Lord. And they gave a great message, whatever the message was. What if he was traveling from the temple? He's done heard the Lord speak through the preacher. And done seen the Lord serve through the servant, the Levite. And he's like, Lord, I need to do better. That I need to be more like that because I know this is the way you would be. Saw him with compassion. He saw him too. Well, the priest saw him. The Levite saw him. And on the other side. Obviously, the Samaritan's going to do it because they're rascals. They're half-breeds. They're nothing like us good religious people. They don't look like us. They don't act like us. Yeah, they come to church. We tolerate them. They can sit in the back. It's not a big deal. Maybe they sit in the front. We don't care. We don't like to sit in the front anyway. But he was in the temple. When he saw him, he was deeply moved with compassion. The one that is talking to God for you, the one that is leading the people in the temple, the priest, didn't have the compassion of God for this guy. That's scary. The Levite, the one that is serving the temple, serving people, was in a hurry to get home. They both were in a hurry to get home, to get down the mountain. Whether they were afraid for their lives, which would be a logical thing. I got to get down this mountain as fast as I can so I don't get beat up and put in the ditch too. I mean, that's a logical thing. But that's not compassionate. They both did that. Here's this half-breed, there's this rascal, has nothing to do with him, they think has nothing to do with God, and they're probably scoffing at him as they're serving and preaching their sermon in the temple, like, I think that's a Samaritan, look the way he looks. What's he even doing in here? And he absorbed everything the pastor said. He absorbed all the service that would happen, and he goes, Lord, I want to be more like you. And he had compassion on him. And he went to him. The religious people went from him. He went to him. There's pain, there's hurt. We've been talking about it a lot because it goes with the fruit of the Spirit. This is kindness in its purest sense. The priest had no kindness. The Levite had no kindness. The rascal, the sinning Samaritan, as they would say, showed compassion and kindness to this guy in more ways than we've probably ever heard, or I've ever heard. And if I listen to the Holy Spirit, it's going to really give you some things to think about, because we've thought about a few things we probably never put together before in this. Now it gets good, because now it gets really good. So he went to him. He bandaged his wounds. Do you think the guy was just carrying a first aid kit with strips of bandage? Where did he get the bandages?
His own clothing.
He had to tear his own clothing, most likely. Sacrifice. Kindness will cost you a sacrifice. It's going to cost you something. It costs you time, may cost you money, may cost you material things. Kindness costs something. The priest wasn't willing to sacrifice. The Levite wasn't willing to sacrifice. It was a religious duty to them. This guy was willing to sacrifice. Imagine. He didn't dress the way they wanted him to dress anyway to come in their church. And now he's ripped his clothes. Can you imagine if the Levite see him in town, at the town they're getting ready to go to, be like, look at this bum. He's all ragged up and tore up. Not knowing that the guy's in the hotel. This is what the Levite and the priest could be doing to this guy. And he sacrificed a whole lot more than they did. Because he's sacrificing his life that they didn't to stop. Because what if they're still there? What if they're waiting for someone to help this guy so they can get them too? And obviously, this guy had enough money because he's going to help this guy at the end. So he had something. So there was something visible that the robbers could have seen and be like, we can get something. So obviously, hopefully they were gone. If not, maybe the Holy Spirit and the angels like, nope. We know it's a story. Keep that in mind. Had compassion on him. Bandaged his wounds. Pouring oil. Let's assume this guy's an oil salesman. That's his livelihood. He crushes olive oil. He takes all month to get a gallon or two of olive oil from thousands of olives off the tree. Takes all month. Him, his family, his kids. And that little gallon jug of oil might be enough to get him to survive throughout the next month. Well, he gives everything he had. I'm giving everything I got. This is how I feed my family. This is how I pay my bills. This olive oil is my business. It cost me something. I can sell it for good money. But you need it. I'm pouring it out on you. Study sometime in the Old Testament. There's an offering that gets poured out on the ground. Study that sometime. It's a great foreshadow of Jesus with his blood being shed for us. This servant is following Jesus to a T. And the priest and the Levite wouldn't even hardly want him sitting in their temple. He poured out his oil and wine on them. Same thing. That wine cost him something. Maybe that's all he has to drink to get to him journey, because most of their water was bad. That's why they drank wine all the time. Because at least it took a lot of the impurities out the way they made it, so they had something they could drink. That was why they drank wine. It wasn't like they wanted to be drunks. This was a necessity. If I drink out of the water, I'm going to get sick. If I drink the wine, not drink a lot of it in excess, and just keep hydrated, I'll be okay. So this wine costs him something. And the Amplified said, to soothe and disinfect the injuries. He took care of this guy. He didn't know this guy's going to live. He don't know this guy's the robber himself in disguise. At this point, I think he would, since he starts, working on him. Because if he was the robber, he'd be like, you're pouring oil on me. No, don't pour on me. I'm going to get to it, But he's sacrificing stuff, and he's not done. Then he put him on his own animal. Okay. This guy has an animal. We know he has wine. We know he has oil. What if he's a traveling salesman that sold wine and oil? Do you think if I was a robber in the woods or the hills, look down and see jugs hanging over this animal and go, I don't know what's in it. I don't care if it's water. My family can use the water. If it's anything else, I can sell it. So he's a prime target as he's going. So he's really sacrificing something. He's sacrificing not only his life by stopping with the animal, and he's sacrificing his own comfort. Remember, it's a 17-mile journey. So we know it's on the mountain. We do not know how far up the mountain it was. I don't know. Let's see. Jane was in the military, so she's probably walked at least 17 miles at one time.
Yes.
So she's probably done that. Most of us have probably walked a mile at some capacity. Well, that's not fun sometimes. At least you're going downhill. But this guy was riding his animal with his goods on the animal, all his possessions, whether they were clothes or not, it doesn't matter. The robbers had prime thing, nothing else to get the animal. So he was really sacrificing something. The priest and Levite walking alone, as far as we know according to the scripture, what are they going to get? Whatever was on a priest, they see a priest and be like, we know he ain't going to have no money. He probably left it at the temple. A Levite, he ain't going to have nothing because he gives it away all the time. You know, they're like, we want to get him. So if there was robbers, they had nothing to worry about. Here he puts him on his animal. And brought him to an inn and took care of him. Okay. He takes him to the hotel. Here, your problem now. I got to keep journey. Got to get more oil in my wine or whatever I'm selling or whatever reason I'm going down the mountain. I got to go. I'm in a hurry. I'm on a business trip. This guy was on a trip. He says he's on a trip. He was traveling, so we know he's got to be somewhere for some reason. And he goes, I got to stop. He stayed in that overnight with this guy. It's 17 miles. At least with an animal, I'm sure he could have done it in one time. He didn't have to stay somewhere. And he decided to stay and take care of him. He didn't just throw him in the hotel and say, hey guy, if he wakes up in the morning, great, kick him out, whatever. It's on his own. Hopefully he's figure out somehow to pay you. He stayed in there. He used more of his resources, more of his time, more of his energy. You talk about kindness. He was sacrificing a lot to take care of this guy. He spent the night with this guy taking care of him. Probably using more oil, probably using more wine, probably ripping more bandages off his clothes or clothes that he had. Total sacrifice. That word is what rings through my mind when I think of kindness as a fruit of the Spirit. Sacrifice. An act of sacrifice. It's going to cost you something. Time, resources, energy. But we ain't got to the good part yet. Imagine that. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii. 2 days of wages. Now he's paying for the guy. He says, I'm leaving. Here's 2 days. He can stay in 2 more nights. That's a good deal. You can stay in the hotel for 2 nights. I need a place to live. You can stay in there for 2 nights. You know, get rest. Don't worry about nothing. At least you got 2 nights to stay in the hotel. Here you go. But that wasn't it. That ain't what it was. He didn't just kick him to the curb. I'm leaving. Hope you can roll around. Hope you can find something to eat. You got 2 nights to stay. That's the best I can do. I paid the guy at the front desk. He didn't stop there. He says, the next day he took out 2 denarii, 2 days of wages, and gave them to the innkeeper. Okay? And said, take care of him. You take care of him. You go in the room, you check on him. I left some strips of bandages there, or I'm assuming you'll take care of it. Because of the next statement he says, if the innkeeper had to do something, he's going to pay him for it. So assuming that I'll pay for whatever resources you need to keep him well. Because you take care of him. Well, I'm the innkeeper. And I heard a story about a baby coming through And I heard about the innkeeper, so I ain't got a room. Kicked him to the stable. And they were calling, baby Jesus. It's this Jesus thing. And I know it's a special event in the temple because the Levite came through a little while earlier and the priest came through a little earlier. And I saw them walk through town, but you stopped. We don't know what he said. He might have not have said nothing. But the innkeeper remembers this story. No one wanted to take care of this baby Jesus. Maybe it was his grandfather. We don't know. I love to think like that. Maybe it was his grandfather that owned the inn. Maybe we don't. I know it's not the same inn because they're in different towns. But imagine, grandfather over here in the town where baby Jesus was born owned the inn, and now I'm growing up. I get to own the inn just like my great granddad. And I was like, yes, our family has arrived. We kept the inn in the. We got multiple inns now. We're the Hilton. We got them everywhere. And Granddad said the greatest regret he ever had was not giving Joseph and Mary his own room. And he said from then on, if anybody ever needed help, and if someone ever asked for help, I'd help them. Did the wounded guy ask for help? No. Someone asked for help for him. And that met the same criteria. The innkeeper said, whether the innkeeper did it out of compassion or whether he did it out of greed for the money, we don't know. But either way, he did it. He didn't go, nah, I'm not going to do it. So he had at least enough compassion to do it for the money to take care of this guy. Gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I'll pay you when I return. Well, this guy's walked this road a lot. This guy walks up and down the road. This is his business route. Again, we're speculating. He's selling wine and oil up and down the route. All up and down the mountain, all the little stops all along the way. And that's his job. Go to the temple and I worship on Sunday in Jerusalem the way my Lord told me to. Not as a bad Samaritan. I'm a good Samaritan. I do what Jesus told me or the Lord told me to do. And I'm worshiping in the temple on Sunday. And when I come home, I sell my goods. Maybe I sell some on the way too. And take care of my family. Now this is Jesus. Which of these three do you think proved himself a neighbor to the man who was encountered the robber? That was the question Jesus asked him. What question did the guy ask Jesus?
Who is my neighbor?
Who is my neighbor? Here's Jesus. What did he do? Switched the question. Jesus said, which of these three do you think proved himself a neighbor to the man who encountered the robbers? I'd never heard that before. Well, Good Samaritan. It was always about me, right? You be a Good Samaritan. He's the neighbor. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, I'm the neighbor. I'm not supposed to be a neighbor to everyone. I've always heard this story written the other way from the lawyer's perspective. Who out there is my neighbor? Is it the one down the street? Is it the one in California? Or who is my neighbor? That's not what Jesus said this parable was about. Jesus said this parable is about who you're going to be a neighbor to. You are a neighbor to everyone you interact with. Or you're going to pass by on the other side. Fascinated me. Who is our neighbor? It's fascinating. Jesus switched the question on the guy. Again, you're asking the wrong question. It's not who are you supposed to serve. It's you're the neighbor. You're supposed to serve everyone. It's fascinating. But he wasn't done. He answered. This is what this guy's answering. This guy asked the question, who's my neighbor? And then Jesus switched the question. He said, he answered, the one who showed compassion and mercy to him. Then Jesus said to him, go and constantly do the same. It puts a bigger picture on who the neighbor is, doesn't it? The question isn't who's my neighbor. The question is who am I going to be neighborly to? That's what Jesus said. Who are you going to be neighborly to?
Can I inject a little story
Sure.
about that?
Sure.
My dad had Alzheimer's, and my mom could see well, but one day he got out, and he went out on the road, and he fell in a ditch. They lived in the country, and these two guys were coming down the road in a pickup truck. Apparently they knew who he was. They stopped and brought him home, and of course she didn't even know he was out. But he did that. They didn't even know where he was.
Yeah.
And it was even like another day before she told me, but I went and, prepared him in the living room. It wasn't a horrible problem, but
Right.
it was scary.
Right? Right? And what if they'd have went to the other side of the road?
What is the difference between religious and Christian? A lot of people say, well, I'm religious. Well, you can be religious in anything you do. It's like a ritual, rules and regulations,
Religion is relying on yourself to get to God.
and not doing what Christ learned.
And we are followers of Christ. And that's the main thing. We are following Christ.
Doing Christ like.
And we rely on Him to do everything to get us to Him. There's nothing we do. We are, in this scenario, we are good Samaritans because Christ loved us first. You gotta remember, we love because He loved us first. That's the whole point. We are going down that mountain, and we're the Levite, we're watching the priest. We see Jesus stop and mend the guy. We see Jesus heal the people. We see Jesus serve the people. We see Jesus love the people. And in the scenario we gave, we're the Levite. We go, He's doing it. If I see it, I'm going to do it. It's like you say, you can't love unless you understand how to love. And the only way to understand how to love is to see Jesus love us and others. And we love like Him. We are followers of Christ. Anybody ever ask me, what religion are you? I'm not religious at all. I'm a follower of Christ, trying to be like Christ. Now, if you're Muslim, you're trying to do everything, whatever, you're trying to do the things. The easiest example to say religion is Jehovah's Witness. I got to knock on enough doors and be the number one under 144 so that I can make it into heaven. That's their whole religion. Do enough good to make it into heaven. And I'm like, if I relied on what I have to do, I would be 144 and a 1. And I would be disappointed that I let Jane knock on one door than me the day that I got tired and I didn't want to get out of the car. Because which one Jesus would have gave us that one that knock on the door? We both were there, but she knocked on it and I stayed in the car. That's just the way I would be, because I know me, I will fail. And Jesus knew we would fail. He knew the only way to get to God was through Him. Accept Him, what He did for us, so that we don't have to do. Because you go through the whole Old Testament, that was why Jesus had to come, because they kept failing.
Yeah, they were not understanding what God was trying to tell them.
Yeah, they kept trying to do it on their own. But it was fascinating. Go and constantly do the same. I love the word constantly. Anytime I see someone in the ditch, I'm supposed to pick them up. That's fascinating. I got several thoughts. I got plenty of time. I knew it would go fast. I just didn't know how fast. So we'll get into this deep. I got three things to think about maybe four if I use some of the other things I got. First thing to think about, don't just see a need, meet one. Because we all see the need. Some of them we can meet. Don't just see it, meet it. And I started, I call it picking on. I wasn't picking on Mary, but I started picking on Mary in the beginning, talking about a roof. Well, I don't know how long, I don't know if it was her and Chris, or from her, I was hearing that her roof was bad. And it was bugging me. So we had a Sunday school class over there. There was a dozen of us or so in there. And I was talking to Frank. I said, we got to do something. Don't know what we can do, but we got to do something. But then I was talking to the pastor at the time, and he said, well, we got a little fund here. We can do something with this. And I was like, okay. So if I I was talking to him for 3-4 weeks, 2 months about this thread that we can do something, but we're going to talk about it for 2 months before we get to do anything. And finally, I just went out and said, we're going to set a date. Will you pay for it? And we talked again for a little while. And then finally I said, Mary, is it possible you have enough to pay for the materials and get reimbursed? Because they say they're going to do it, but I'm tired of waiting. It's getting cold, and I don't want to be up on the roof in the snow. Because it was like October at this point. We started talking about it probably in August. He says, yes. Well, me and Frank said, okay. I talked to him, and I go, I can go just about any time because I might have been working then, I don't remember. And he said, let's do it Thursday. That'd give us Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I wanted to do it on a Thursday or Friday to give us the weekend if we needed it. And not expecting him to bring all the cool stuff so we could do it really fast, which was really awesome.
It was.
And so, not only, because I'm sure other people saw the need. I heard the need. My roof's leaking. My roof's leaking. It's causing other damage. My roof's leaking. For how long had people heard the need? But they wasn't compassionate and started going, oh, I know how to put shingles on the roof. That's not a big deal. If we can figure out how to get the money so that we can buy shingles, should cost about $1,000, $1,500. So if we can figure out how to do that, then we get it done. But persistently, we had to keep knocking. Just like when we pray. Hey, there's a need. There's a need. And finally it all worked out. There was bumps. There was a lot of bumps. There was some bumps that I'm not going to talk about. But there was bumps. But she got that roof.
Yes, thank you.
And it didn't matter to me and Frank what was going to happen with those bumps. God, you smoothed the bumps out. She got the roof. Well, how many other little things throughout time were we here? And my lawnmower's broke down and I don't know when I'm going to get to cut my grass, and you're the neighbor and you're watching their grass go. And maybe they're elderly and that makes it even worse. My lawnmower's broke down. Or I can't afford to have the guy that cuts my grass anymore that did a beautiful job because now he's charging me X amount. And you may have a push mower, but you're healthy enough to do it. You may have a ride mower, it makes it easier, you could do it. Or maybe you even had the means to go, you know what, I can find some little kid somewhere. It may not be as beautiful as that, and I can afford to pay a kid $20, $30 to keep it cut down at least. So she's just this miraculous thing, but at least now it's okay. Or maybe you can just, how much was the guy charging? I can swing that. But the little things we see. Imagine the scenario Jesus used was to a stranger. This was a stranger. We don't know if this guy ever saw this guy before. We don't know if it was the guy sitting on the other side of the pew or the other side of the temple and he recognized him. We don't know. All we know is he had compassion on him, like he said, and he went to him and he took care of the dude's need. So that's one. Second thing. This is something for you to really think about. What you do is who you are. Think about that. If you are genuinely compassionate, you will serve other people and you will inconvenience yourself to do things for them in their time of need. Because that's who you are. Pastor's doing a series now on making decisions ahead of time so that you don't have to make them in time of a crisis. Basically, that's what it boils down to, and he's using different scenarios. So if you have a compassionate heart willing to serve and you see a need, you are intuitively trying to figure out how to meet that need. So how can I help this? Well, I can't do that. I can't do this. Well, maybe that person can. Maybe if I get 6 or 7 of us together. And we get the thing done. You do who you are. What you do is who you are. So that comes out of you. The third thing, It's kind of hard to read my writing sometimes. I'm going to read what I think it says, and then I may have to interpret it to myself. What you see is determined by who you are. What you see is determined. Because if I see a bum on the side of the road, I'm not going to care that the bum is on the side of the road. But if I see a human being on the side of the road that is hurting, I'm going to help him. If I look with the eyes of Christ, I'm going to do as Christ does because that's who I'm supposed to be. So if I am seeing with the eyes of Christ, what would Jesus do? Jesus would take care of the guy. And that's fascinating. I'll give you one last story. It's quarter after, so we're getting close. One last story. Me and my cousin used to do clean-outs for the bank in foreclosed homes. And when we first started, we never saw the little stickers they put on the windows. We never saw the piece of paper they put on the front screen door to say this foreclosed home, and we never saw them. We finally found one so that we could get a number so we could start doing them. We started doing them. And we could ride down the road, and we would not miss one. We go, there's a sticker. That one's foreclosed. Oh, that one's foreclosed. And we didn't get to service those houses or get in those houses because they had their own people doing different things. But we started doing it. Have you ever noticed when you buy a certain car, you never saw the car until you bought one, now you see it everywhere? Have you ever noticed that you bought something and no one ever had it and you thought, this is cool, I'm the only one that has it, and then you see it everywhere? Do you know why that is? It's because your brain is wired to see what it's seen. I've seen the red car, so now all I see is all the red cars. There's never a yellow car out there. I'm going to buy a yellow car, and all of a sudden there's yellow everywhere. Why is it? Because now you're looking for it. So if I'm looking for it, that must mean Jesus is going around looking for opportunities to serve and minister to people. Because you go through the Gospels and he was always doing it. He was never interrupted. And we could take a lot of stories where, boy, that interrupted him. That he stopped when he didn't need to stop. He was going and he got interrupted. And we think little things interrupt us all the time. Jesus was never interrupted. This is an opportunity to serve. If Jesus would have walked this path, he probably would have reached down, healed the guy, got up and took him into town, and they would have had a good old time at the end together. But think about that. Who's your neighbor is not the question. You're a neighbor to who is the question. I love Jesus. He's always turning stuff around. Did Jesus in any fashion or any way answer any of that lawyer's questions throughout the story we just said? Not once. Not once did he answer his question. But did that guy get the answer? Because when you answer the question, you'll own it. If I tell you the answer, it's not going to sink in right here.
Right, you might not even buy it.
Jesus understood that. I can tell you what you should do, but if I can tell you a story, or if I can show you a way, and you go, I like that, now it's mine. And Jesus was such a good communicator, he could make you think you thought the idea up in the first place, and it was all you, not even him. That's what a good communicator does. Never got there. I don't think I've ever got there. I could do it sometimes with the kids once in a while, but I think that was about it. But that's what Jesus did all the time. He's always asking us questions. Because if I find the answer, I'll remember it. So be a good Samaritan. And I think gentleness is the next one. So that'd be an interesting one. And we'll see what we do with gentleness. I think gentleness has more to do with who we are than what we do. Kindness was the same thing, but it's what we do with who we are. So it's pretty fascinating. So Deborah's here. I don't have to say goodbye to her, so I'll just say goodbye.